Yeah, right now, my life looks like a rejected Cirque du Soleil rehearsal, and it's all thanks to Barbara. I'm balanced halfway up a 3-story extension ladder, the kind that promises stability but delivers only the cold, heart-stopping awareness of your own mortality, wrestling a massive industrial spool of what appears to be radioactive moss. This isn't just green, it's neon green. It's the color of a poisoned lollipop, or maybe a 1990s rave gone horribly wrong. It's glorious. My shoulder aches, my palms are sweaty, and I'm muttering technical obscenities involving amperage and voltage drop under my breath. The sun dipped an hour ago, which is perfect, because the grand unveiling needs darkness. This entire, utterly ridiculous, financially questionable endeavor is the direct result of one woman, Barbara Peterson. Barbara, you see, is not just a neighbor. She is the high priestess of the Homeowners Association, the self-appointed queen of conformity in this beige and taupe purgatory we call Shady Oaks Estates. She looks exactly how you'd imagine. Tightly wound silver hair, perpetually surprised eyebrows, and a wardrobe that exclusively features tailored linen suits in various shades of cream. She treats our neighborhood covenants like the Dead Sea Scrolls, except Barbara didn't find them. She wrote them. My initial sin, my cardinal offense, was painting my house. After enduring 3 years of the previous owner's faded, vaguely salmon-colored siding, I finally invested in a rich, sophisticated shade of dark charcoal gray. It was sharp. It was moody. It was, to my aesthetic taste, damn near perfect. That perfection lasted precisely 3 hours before Barbara deployed her first tactical maneuver, the passive-aggressive front door ambush. "Leo," she'd said, standing 3 feet from my threshold, her face a mask of strained politeness. She carried a laminated color swatch of a color she called Gentle Pebble. I must address the situation. The situation being my new paint job, I asked, leaning against the now charcoal frame. I like it. It's moody. She visibly recoiled from the word moody. Leo, it's not about liking it. It's about living here. This color, this gloom, is in direct violation of the Visual Vibrancy Clause, Section 4, Subsection B. It is, and I quote, dreary, depressing, and casts an un-American pall upon the communal curb appeal. Look at poor Mrs. Henderson across the street. She can barely see her petunias in the shade your house is casting. I need you to repaint, dear. I stared at her. Barbara, it's gray. It's literally 1 shade darker than slate. And the Visual Vibrancy Clause is something you invented last Thursday. Nonsense, she sniffed, adjusting the single, perfect, gold-plated brooch on her lapel. The clause is essential for maintaining aesthetic consistency. Your house is simply too dark. She repeated that phrase like an incantation. Dark. That night, stewing in a mixture of righteous indignation and sheer suburban frustration, I had the kind of idea that only comes after too much cheap whiskey and a lifetime of repressed sarcasm. She wanted vibrant? I'd give her vibrant. She wanted light? I'd give her so much light she'd think the rapture was happening exclusively over my 2-car garage. I found the most obnoxious, visually aggressive retina-searing color available in the entire visible light spectrum. The moment I clicked Add to Cart on the 5,000 feet of industrial-grade, fully waterproof, self-adhesive neon green LED strip, I knew I had committed to a beautiful, stupid war. It wasn't enough to just install them. They had to be perfectly installed. Every corner, every gable, every window frame, outlined. She claimed my house was too dark, so I was going to turn it into a high-definition video game avatar of itself. And now, here I am, 50 feet up, my heart hammering, the cold metal of the ladder biting into my hands. The spool is heavy, the wire is tangled, and I'm ready for the opening night. Barbara is undoubtedly watching from behind her pristine sheer curtains, waiting for me to fail. Not tonight, Barbara. Not tonight. The sheer logistics of illuminating a 2-story home like a cheap strip mall sign quickly became a harsh reality check. My initial plan, which consisted mostly of buy the green stuff and stick it on, fell apart the moment I stepped into the hardware store Odyssey. I walked into Home Depot Suburbia, feeling like an explorer venturing into the Amazon. Only the Amazon smelled faintly of sawdust and regret. I was hunting for specific wires, power supplies, and enough waterproof connectors to build a small submarine. I eventually found the electrical aisle, which is always staffed by someone who looks like they've seen too much. That someone was Doug. Doug was leaning on a pallet of drywall spackle, looking like a man who hadn't smiled since 1998. He wore a name tag that said, "Doug, ask me about grounding." I was definitely not going to ask him about grounding. "Help you, bud?" Doug asked, without moving any part of his body except his lips. I gestured wildly at the giant spool of neon green doom I'd dragged over. "Okay, I need to power this. It's 5,000 feet of 12-volt LED. It needs to run on a continuous loop around my entire house. The trim, the windows, the gutters, every single perpendicular line. How much power am I talking about? And what kind of wire won't melt the siding off?" Doug blinked slowly, taking in the full visual absurdity of the massive green spool. He tilted his head. "So what you're saying is, you want your house to be visible from the International Space Station, right?" "Ideally, yes," I confirmed, deadly serious. "I need maximum non-flammable visibility." He sighed. A deep, existential sigh that suggested he was contemplating the futility of human existence as a whole. "You're going to need 4 separate 300-watt power supplies, running off 2 dedicated 15-amp circuits. And you're going to need minimum 12-gauge primary wire, waterproof sheathing, and a whole lot of patience. You're trying to power an aircraft carrier's runway lights with a battery from a remote control car, son." "Just tell me what to buy, Doug. I'm engaged in a neighborhood conflict that requires technical superiority." Doug just nodded, handing me a slip of paper with a list that looked more like the manifest for a small electronics factory. "I see a lot of things in this aisle, bud. I see dreams, I see broken promises, I see divorce papers. This looks like a preemptive lawsuit. Good luck." His dry, sardonic commentary somehow made the $800 bill hurt a little less. Word count check. 350 words. Armed with enough wire to tie up a small elephant and 4 black boxes labeled Danger, High Voltage, I started the DIY disaster phase. I set aside a Saturday. I figured, I'm a man, I have hands, and I watched 2 YouTube videos on basic electrical wiring. That makes me an expert, right? Wrong. So very wrong. The first attempt was trying to splice the tiny wires of the LED strip into the heavy 12-gauge wire. I didn't have a proper stripper, so I tried a pair of scissors. That resulted in me just snipping the wires clean off. Then I tried an old kitchen knife. I still have a faint scar on my thumb that reminds me of that particular moment of desperation. My biggest mistake was testing the circuit before I properly sealed it. I had the main power supply plugged into an extension cord running through my window. I touched 2 bare wires together. Just for a second. Just to see if the green light would, glow. What happened next wasn't a gentle flicker. It was a loud Zap! A blinding blue spark jumped off the wire and hit the tip of my index finger. I simultaneously yelped, dropped the wire, and nearly lost my footing on the stepladder, which then proceeded to slide 3 inches sideways across the concrete. "Holy Moses!" I shouted, clutching my finger and shaking it violently. It felt like someone had stabbed my hand with a tiny electrified knitting needle. I decided right then and there that this was not a solo mission. This wasn't a DIY project. This was a job for someone who had gone to college specifically to avoid being shocked. As if summoned by the crackle of burning insulation, a letter arrived later that day. Barbara, ever vigilant, had already launched her HOA threat, cease and desist. The envelope was cream-colored, heavily embossed, and smelled faintly of lavender. I ripped it open. Subject: immediate concern regarding preparatory activity and preemptive visual pollution. Dear Mr. Jensen, it began, its tone colder than a January midnight. The board has been alerted to your conspicuous purchase of large quantities of unapproved, high-lumen and frankly garish lighting materials. While we understand your desire to address the previously noted too dark condition of your home, any installation of lighting that exceeds 400 lumens per lineal foot, or is outside the approved color palette, as defined in Appendix C, natural hues and earth tones, shall be considered preemptive visual pollution and a violation of the aforementioned Visual Vibrancy Clause. Cease all preparatory activity immediately. I started laughing. I read the line, decibel level of visual annoyance, and nearly choked. Preemptive visual pollution. She was fighting a war against a color that hadn't even been illuminated yet. This only strengthened my resolve. I realized that to win, I needed not just light. I needed professional, technically sound, and legally unassailable light. I couldn't risk her finding an amateur mistake. I needed an expert who could wire the house like a bunker and produce receipts, permits, and licenses that even Barbara couldn't argue with. I tossed the letter on the counter, picking up my phone. "All right, Karen," I muttered, rubbing my slightly charred finger. "You want to play the professional game? I'll hire the pros. Let's see what happens when the chaos is certified." The search for the right professional was a comedy of errors. I needed an electrician who was competent, affordable, and, most importantly, willing to take on a project that reeked of highly specific, neighborhood-level pettiness. The quotes I got were a masterclass in absurdity. My first call was for a quote from Precision Power and Light. 2 guys showed up in matching slate-gray polo shirts, crisp khaki pants, and safety glasses that looked like they cost more than my first car. They were meticulous. They were terrifying. This was my contractor interview #1. The over-engineers. "Mr. Jensen," the first guy, Gary, said, clicking his fancy laser measure against my siding. "The issue here is not merely illumination, it's distribution and dispersion." The second guy, Mark, chimed in, holding a tablet displaying a 3D rendering of my house. "We recommend a complete overhaul of your low-voltage infrastructure. We'll integrate a proprietary system to manage the lumen delivery, ensuring perfect, continuous hue consistency across all 4 elevation planes." I rubbed my chin. "So, you're going to wire the green lights?" "Oh, we'll wire them, yes," Gary said, his voice dripping with condescension. "But we need to mitigate the potential for visual heat sink over the long runs. We'll install a thermal dampening plenum along the eaves, and frankly, sir, we insist on integrating the ambient light sensor damping system." "The what now?" "It's essential," Mark explained, adjusting his glasses. "It automatically adjusts the brightness by 0.05% every 5 minutes after sunset, ensuring the transition from twilight is optimally smooth. We want the green to gently assert itself, not just appear. I nearly choked on my own sarcasm. So you want to charge me $12,000 to make a subtle, gentle, neon green statement? The entire point is for it to be aggressive and appear suddenly. Gary frowned. Aggressive illumination is contrary to our brand standards, sir. We could do it, but we'd need a waiver against aesthetic degradation. The total, including the thermal dampening plenum, is $14,800. Hard pass, I said instantly. I appreciate the engineering, but I'm waging a war of tacky compliance, not trying to achieve LEED certification for garishness. Next up was the complete opposite end of the spectrum. Contractor interview No. 2, the Budget Cowboys. I found them on a hastily printed flyer, stapled to a utility pole. Larry's Lights and Stuff. We wire anything. Larry showed up in a rusted pickup truck that smelled faintly of two-stroke engine oil and old hot dogs. So, you want to wire up all that stuff? Larry asked, gesturing vaguely at the mountainous pile of neon cable in my garage. He was wearing shorts and flip-flops, which is not exactly confidence-inspiring when discussing high-voltage current. Yep, outline the whole house, neon green, professionally and compliantly installed. Larry spat something. I chose not to examine what, onto my lawn. Compliant. Right. Look, I can do this cheap, real cheap. I got a guy, Hector, he's got a system. We run the main lines right through your attic and then punch them out the back. Here's the deal. To save you, like, $1,000 on wiring, we can tap the biggest line available inside, which is probably your dryer or your HVAC unit. It'll be fine. Total quote, $1,500 cash. No receipt. I stared at him. So, you want to power 5,000 feet of high-intensity LED lighting by splicing into the 220-volt line that powers my clothes dryer? It's efficient, Larry grinned, revealing a distracting gap between his two front teeth. And when you turn on the lights, the dryer will spin extra fast. Bonus! Larry, if I power the neon green house of suburban revenge off my dryer vent, and my house burns down, the HOA will still somehow blame me. Suit yourself, fancy pants, Larry grumbled, stomping back to his truck. He yelled back, I can do the dryer vent job for $2,200 if you throw in a case of domestic light beer. I sighed. $14,000 for perfection, or $1,200 and the likely ignition of my domicile. There had to be a middle ground. And then I found Eddie. I called a highly rated local firm, and they sent Electric Eddie. Eddie was in his late 40s, wore a moderately stained but professional uniform, and had the tired eyes of a man who understood everything and was disappointed by most of it. I showed him the green cable and explained the entire saga, starting with Barbara's accusation that my house was too dark. I expected judgment. I received pure, unadulterated fascination. So, let me get this straight, Eddie said, pulling out a measuring tape, but not before giving the neon spool a low whistle. A woman in a linen suit told you your dark gray house was depressing, and your response is to turn it into an early 2000s laser tag arena. Precisely, I confirmed. And I need it done so flawlessly that she can't sue me for a single misplaced staple or a fractional voltage irregularity. Eddie adjusted his tool belt and looked at the sheer, overwhelming amount of neon green. You, sir, are a magnificent lunatic, and I respect that. He walked the perimeter of my house, muttering calculations to himself. We're talking significant, dedicated low-voltage infrastructure. 4 separate runs, clean conduit, weather-sealed junctions, 2 new external breakers. You'll be pulling enough juice to keep a small server farm humming. So, what's the damage? My professional fee, Eddie said, drawing up a legitimate quote on a legitimate tablet. Plus a 25% absurdity tax for the sheer joy of wiring a private residence to resemble a nuclear fallout beacon. Total, $4,800. And I'll get you the permits. You're hired. Eddie was the perfect mix of cynical competence and appreciation for the theatrical. We shook hands. He immediately nicknamed the project the Nuclear Glow. The last hurdle was the building permit blues. Eddie handled the electrical permit, but the city required a separate exterior aesthetics modification permit due to the high lumen output. This required me to physically go to the permit office downtown. I spent 40 minutes in a beige, fluorescent-lit waiting room that smelled like old coffee and crushed dreams. Eventually, I was called to the desk of a woman named Tiffany, who looked like she'd been forced to eat the clock. I handed her the application. She scanned it, her eyes settling on the description. High-intensity perimeter illumination. Okay, Mr. Jensen, she droned. I need the exact color code. Per Ordinance 14B, Section 7. All non-standard colors must be specified using a Pantone color match. I blinked. A Pantone code? It's neon green. It's the most neon green you can imagine. It glows. Tiffany didn't look up. Code, please. Is it Pantone 381 or Pantone 802C? I felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it. The moment I chose the weapon. It's 802C, I declared. The one they use for highway visibility vests. The one that makes your eyes water. Tiffany scribbled it down. 802C. Okay, I'm filing this under visually hyper-vibrant. We'll send you the approval in 3 to 5 business days. I walked out of that office, victorious permit and Pantone code in hand. Barbara wanted rules? I had just legally certified my house to emit the color of pure, unadulterated spite. The night of the grand illumination, I took to calling it the inauguration, was tense. Eddie had been working for 3 straight days, running discrete conduit, drilling pilot holes, and generally treating my house like a highly classified military installation. He finished the final wiring around 8:00 p.m. He was crouched by the exterior junction box, his headlamp casting a ghostly glow on his face. All right, Leo, Eddie said, wiping his brow. She's good to go. Everything is up to code. Dedicated circuits, surge protection, ground fault interrupt. You could use this place as a lighthouse, and it wouldn't trip a breaker. I looked at the house, now completely outlined in matte black conduit, with the occasional flash of the unpowered neon green strip. Still hideous, but dormant. So, no chance of a fire? Zero, unless you decide to hit it with a flamethrower. But legally, structurally, electrically, this thing is bulletproof. You built a legal, visually aggressive fortress. All that's left is the performance review. Eddie paused, giving me a hard, knowing look. He delivered his profound, sarcastic thesis on human nature. You know, I've seen people go to war over property lines, dog poop, and whether or not their shed is 6 inches too high. But this is art. It's the highest form of suburban passive aggression. It's glorious. Don't waste it. He packed up his tools and gave me a final salute. Enjoy the glow, buddy. My fee's in the mail. I waited 15 minutes for Eddie's truck to clear the neighborhood, savoring the silence. My heart was pounding like a drum solo. I walked over to the newly installed, weather-sealed exterior switch. It was housed in a pristine gray box, a stark contrast to the light it was about to release. My hands were shaking slightly. This was it, the moment of truth. The official response to Too Dark. I took a deep breath, braced myself, and slammed the switch down. The big reveal was not subtle. It was not gentle. It was not kind. The moment the current hit the 5,000 feet of industrial-grade LED, the entire block of Shady Oaks Estates was bathed in an emergency, biohazard-level neon green. It wasn't a glow. It was a sheen. The light seemed to violate the laws of physics, reflecting off every surface, turning the dew on my lawn into shimmering radioactive droplets. My house wasn't merely outlined. It looked like a charcoal sketch drawn by a mad scientist, then highlighted with a laser pen. Every window frame, every gutter, every rain spout was now etched in blinding green. You could see the individual molecules of paint vibrating. I actually had to squint. I wasn't just lighting the house. I was illuminating the very essence of my property with the energy of 1,000 dying suns. My neighbors' previously dull, sensible lawns suddenly looked pale, sickly, and utterly defeated under the green onslaught. The light spilled onto Barbara's immaculate white fence, turning it into a canvas of lime-colored horror. I swear, the birds in the nearby oak tree collectively chirped in confusion before falling silent. For a full minute, I just stood there, basking in the sheer, unadulterated, tacky brilliance of it all. My internal monologue was a triumphant shriek. This is visually hyper-vibrant. This is beyond the 400 lumens. This is the most un-American color known to man. But it is all legally compliant, Barbara. All of it. And then, just as I predicted, Barbara's initial reaction occurred. Her front door, the color of a mild, harmless eggshell, flew open. Barbara herself emerged, not walking but marching, wearing a sensible tracksuit and brandishing a clipboard that looked suspiciously official. She stopped dead on her driveway, momentarily blinded. She had to shield her eyes with the clipboard, which was a nice, poetic touch. "Leo! Jensen!" she shouted, her voice shaking with rage. "What in the name of God have you done? My prize-winning azaleas look like swamp gas." I walked down my front steps, trying to maintain a posture of calm, controlled absurdity. "Barbara, I merely solved the problem you identified. My house was too dark. Per the covenant, I was obligated to increase the visual vibrancy. I have achieved maximum technical compliance." "This isn't compliance. This is a municipal emergency. This is a hazard. It's assaulting my retinas." "Ah, but you see," I said, pulling out the laminated city-stamped document. I filed for and received an exterior aesthetics modification permit for high-lumen output, specifying the exact shade of Pantone 802C, which the city clerk categorized as visually hyper-vibrant. It is vibrant, Barbara. Highly vibrant. You can't argue with the permit. "I'll call the police!" she screamed, tearing at her hair. "Go ahead," I encouraged. "They'll be forced to acknowledge that this is a fully permitted, professionally installed, legal form of spite." And sure enough, about 10 minutes later, I heard the faint, unwelcome sound of approaching sirens. The police interaction began with the arrival of a cruiser, lights flashing, a redundant visual effect considering the amount of light already being emitted from my house. 2 officers stepped out. Officer Jones, tall, young, and looking utterly bewildered. And Officer Davies, older, heavier, and looking like he was seriously considering retirement right there on my lawn. Jones was the first to speak, shading his eyes. "Sir, we received a call about a, quote, unauthorized landing strip and alien landing beacon. Could you explain what this display is?" I sighed dramatically. Officers, allow me to introduce you to the beautiful world of Homeowners Association warfare. I then spent the next 5 minutes giving them the concise, absurd version of the story. Dark House, Barbara's complaint, the visual vibrancy clause, and my technical solution. Davies took one look at my house, looked at Barbara, who was now hovering menacingly on her curb, and rubbed his temples. "Let me guess," Davies said to me, his voice flat. "She claims it's too bright, and you claim it's legally bright." "Precisely, officer. I even have the permit with the Pantone code, Pantone 802C. It's what you call a technical victory." I held up the permit. Jones leaned in, looking at the glowing house, then back at the permit. He started to crack a smile. "Wait. You got a city permit to make your house look like a rave?" "I got a city permit to address the issue of insufficient vibrancy as dictated by my HOA covenant," I corrected. Davies pulled Officer Jones aside for a quiet conversation. I could hear snippets. "A civil matter, Jones. No ordinance against ugly, and I am not going to be the officer who busts a guy for being too compliant." They returned. Davies looked at me, then at Barbara, whose face was a study in pure, unbridled fury. "Mr. Jensen," Davies said, shaking his head, "as much as this is visually aggressive, it is professionally wired. It is not flashing, and you have the necessary permits for the illumination level. It doesn't violate any noise, light, or public decency ordinances we can enforce. It's perfectly legal." He turned to Barbara. "Ma'am, this is a civil dispute between you and your HOA, or between you and Mr. Jensen. It is not a police matter. We suggest you take it up with the board." As the cruiser pulled away, the neon green light reflecting off its roof, I gave Barbara a small, victorious wave. I had just leveraged the full power of the United States Municipal Code to win a color war. The first battle was mine. Barbara, naturally, didn't retreat entirely. She merely regrouped, calling an emergency HOA meeting less than 48 hours after the inauguration. This wasn't just a meeting. It was a tribunal. The gathering was held in the clubhouse meeting room, a bland, off-white space where dreams went to die. Everyone was there. The perpetually nervous Henderson family, the overly tanned retired couple, and about a dozen other homeowners, all of whom looked exhausted just by being in the same room as Barbara. I arrived with my secret weapon, my lawyer friend, Aisha. She specialized in commercial contracts, but she loved a good spectacle and had agreed to be my counsel for the evening, mostly for the free entertainment. Barbara, standing at the front next to an ancient overhead projector, began her presentation. "Good evening, neighbors. We are here tonight to discuss the crisis. The scourge of Pantone 802C. I have prepared evidence." She projected her first slide. It was a graph showing a terrifying, jagged line shooting straight up. This chart represents the estimated decibel level of visual annoyance caused by Mr. Jensen's modification. As you can see, we are operating in the danger zone where visual noise interferes with calm thought and proper lawn aeration. Aisha leaned over to me and whispered, "Decibel level of visual annoyance? Is she trying to invent synesthesia as a legal defense?" Barbara continued, pointing to a photograph of my house at night. "It's blinding. It's gauche. It's technically compliant, yes, but it violates the spirit of the covenant. His house is no longer too dark, but it is now too much. We must pass an immediate amendment, effective tonight, prohibiting any primary illumination from exceeding 100 lumens per foot, and banning all colors categorized by Pantone as day glow or fluorescent." It was my turn. I stood up, adjusting my jacket. "Thank you, Barbara, if I may." Aisha stepped forward, all business and razor-sharp intellect. Mr. Jensen's position is quite simple, members of the board. He was officially notified, in writing, that his dwelling was dreary and depressing due to insufficient visual vibrancy. He took the only legally sound, permitted, and professionally installed steps to remedy the situation by implementing a color and lighting scheme that, while aesthetically challenging, is indisputably vibrant. I added the punchline. I acted in good faith to correct a covenant violation. If you vote tonight to ban the light, you are essentially voting to force me back into non-compliance with the original covenant. You're asking me to violate the rule that you, Barbara, created. The room murmured. The Henderson family exchanged terrified glances. They realized they were trapped in a loop of bureaucratic pettiness. Aisha continued. Furthermore, any ex post facto amendment to ban the light is unenforceable against a modification that was installed and permitted before the amendment was passed. You can ban future neon, but you can't turn off the current neon. Mr. Jensen has won this round, legally and technically. Barbara's face was tomato red. This is ridiculous. We can argue spirit and intent. Spirit and intent don't hold up against a City of Alexandria permit and a receipt from a licensed electrician, Barbara, I retorted. Then came the counter-complaint. This was the coup de grace. I pulled out a second, smaller document from my pocket. Actually, I have a different proposal. While we're amending the rules, I'd like to file a formal complaint under the Excessive Ornamentation Clause, Section 9, Subsection D. I looked directly at Barbara. I am referring to Mrs. Peterson's lawn gnome collection. Silence. Absolute, stunned silence. Mrs. Peterson, I continued, my voice measured and calm. You have 37 lawn gnomes, 6 porcelain frogs, and a 2-foot-tall singing plastic sunflower prominently displayed in your front yard. The Excessive Ornamentation Clause limits non-vegetative landscape enhancements to 10 per property. You are in violation by 27 units. Barbara sputtered. Those are artisan gnomes. They're themed. They're not ornamentation. They're whimsical focal points. Whimsical focal points? That break the rule, Barbara, I said, shrugging. And if we're going to enforce the spirit of the law, I submit that the decibel level of visual annoyance from 37 gnomes is far greater than my house, which is at least cleanly outlined. The room erupted in chaos. Mrs. Henderson started whispering about the gnome count. A retired colonel at the back shouted, "Gnomes are communism!" Barbara, betrayed by her own regulatory zeal, looked like she might spontaneously combust. The board, realizing the entire HOA structure was about to implode in a civil war between neon lights and garden statuary, immediately motioned to adjourn. The motion passed unanimously. They had to save their rule book from the very rules they had created. Barbara's retreat was swift and dramatic. She snatched her visual annoyance charts, glared one last, burning look at me and Aisha, and stomped out of the clubhouse. She was defeated, not by my light, but by the sheer stupidity of the system she had mastered. Outside, Aisha slapped me on the back. 37 gnomes, Leo. That was brilliant. You used the law as a weapon of aesthetic destruction. I smiled, looking back toward my distant, glowing house. She asked for it, Aisha. She asked for compliance, and I delivered. The neighborhood response in the days that followed was mixed but beautiful. Some neighbors, terrified of the neon glow and the possibility of gnome inspections, started quietly painting their trim a slightly darker shade of gray or brown, creating a funny, subtle contrast with my house. They were subtly darkening their homes in silent solidarity, treating my neon glow as a protective ward against Barbara's tyranny. I had become the unintentional champion of mediocrity. Life under the glow, as I quickly learned, was different. Life under the glow meant that every time I pulled into my driveway after work, it felt less like coming home and more like docking a starship. My house didn't just illuminate the street, it dictated the color scheme. Everything in my immediate vicinity was tinted green. I started needing sunglasses to take the trash out after 9 p.m. Cooking became an unexpectedly bright experience. My kitchen was perpetually bathed in a bizarre, green-tinged ambient light, making my scrambled eggs look suspiciously like pond scum, even though they tasted fine. The house became a local landmark. Teenagers would slow down their cars and point. I saw a few tourists actually stop and take photos, whispering things like, "That's the one that sued the HOA." I was no longer Leo Jensen. I was the greenhouse guy. I had achieved accidental urban legend status. About a week after the HOA meeting, Electric Eddie paid me a visit for a final systems check. He pulled up just as I was wrestling with a garden hose that now looked like a radioactive snake. "Just checking the power draw," Eddie said, plugging a meter into the junction box. "She's running steady, barely even breaking a sweat. Looks beautiful, in a way that suggests high-level chemical runoff." "I'm thinking of putting up a sign that says, 'Please do not stare directly at the spite,'" I told him. Eddie just chuckled, pulling a crisp, laminated certificate from his clipboard. "Since you're now a public landmark, I figure you need proper documentation. Here you go." He handed me the paper. It was an official-looking document, complete with his company's logo, titled Nuclear Safety Certificate and Covenant Compliance Seal. The certificate read, "This certifies that the dwelling located at my address is 100% compliant with all known electrical, structural, and absurdly petty suburban codes. It is also certified to emit 0 decibels of visual noise, as the light is so intense, it is beyond human comprehension." I laughed out loud. "This is going straight into a frame." "It should," Eddie said. "You earned it. You made the green stick. Now, if you ever need to replace your entire HVAC system, let me know. I can get you a deal." He then gave me a final professional piece of advice. Never underestimate the power of a Karen scorned. She'll be back. Eddie was right about the final Barbara incident. It happened late one night. I was watching a movie when I heard a soft thump outside. I went to the window, peering through the slight green glow, and saw a figure darting back across her lawn. When I opened the front door, I saw it, a massive, industrial-strength, black canvas blackout tarp rolled up and left strategically on my front steps. It was clearly meant to be draped over the most offensive section of my house. It was her final, silent, passive-aggressive act of protest. I picked it up. It was heavy, thick, and designed to block 99% of all light. I didn't get angry. I got an idea. I grabbed the spare spool of neon green cable that Doug had reluctantly sold me. I spent the next hour meticulously running the last of the LEDs along the seams of the tarp. The next morning, Barbara woke up to find the industrial blackout tarp, meant to signal my defeat, now draped neatly over my garage door, its outline glowing fiercely in the daytime, like a giant neon green, sarcastic flag of victory. I had literally taken her attempt to create darkness and used it to amplify my light. I saw her later that afternoon, peeking out from behind her blinds. I just grinned and went back inside, leaving my house to shine its beautiful, blinding, legal glow upon the world. So that's how I accidentally became the lighting rebel of Shady Oaks Estates. It started because a woman in cream linen complained my house was too dark, and it ended with my entire neighborhood knowing the specific Pantone code for maximum, legally permissible visual spite. It cost me nearly $5,000 and a decent chunk of my sanity. But honestly, worth it. I didn't just illuminate my home, I illuminated the sheer, ridiculous absurdity of life in an HOA, where rules meant to maintain order are weaponized for personal preference. The lesson I took away is simple. If you're going to be petty, make sure you're technically flawless about it. Sometimes the best defense against conforming to bad taste is to conform to the letter of the law in the worst taste possible. I walk out onto my porch now, and I can hear the hum of the transformer. I see the green light casting long, dramatic shadows. I look across the street, and there's Barbara, peering out from behind her newly installed industrial-strength blackout curtains, no doubt planning her next move. I raise my glass of iced tea in a silent toast to her, to Eddie, and to the power of Pantone 802C. Yeah, the house is a little bright. But you know what? So is my future. And Barbara can't do a damn thing but buy a better set of blackout curtains.